We will not end completely depressed. This is depressing. We live in a depressing world, and it's not fun to be a minority. That's one of the things I had the privilege of talking with a good man in India about, what it's like to be an unpopular minority. And it helps me to know what to expect. One thing that I think is overlooked in contemporary analysis of the church and the culture is the impact of the countercultural revolution of the 60s. Something happened. If you had fallen asleep, pulled a Rip Van Winkle in 1963, and then come awake again in 1973, it would be hard for you to imagine that you were in the same country, the same town. The countercultural revolution of the 1960s and early 70s changed America, and the revolutionaries won. That's the bottom line. And so this section, we're going to go back and we're going to look at that time that I lived through, and we're answering the question in this session, how did we get here? American culture began to change dramatically in 1963. 63 was a very interesting year. The civil rights movement was the last crusade, really, of the greatest generation, and that those who were born but hadn't quite come of age at the time of the Second World War. That was going on. Martin Luther King Jr., for example, he wasn't part of the so-called greatest generation, but he was 11 years old or so when the Second World War began, and or ended. I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the chronology there. But that was some have said the last Christian crusade in this country, and I think there's some truth in that. The civil rights movement was led initially by Christians, black Christians from the black church. Radicals from my generation began to offer a more violent approach, and King had to deal with that group as well. But 63 was, of course, the year that John Kennedy was assassinated, and many people believe that was, it was a traumatic event for our generation. As everyone remembers where they were on 9/11, everyone who had any degree of sentience in 1963 remembers where they were when they heard that President Kennedy had been shot. You have vivid memories of that event. Most significantly, something else happened. That's the year the Supreme Court banned prayer from public schools in this country. And if you go to Facebook, you'll see a lot of memes about this, but I think a lot of people miss the point. It wasn't just that prayer and Bible reading was no longer allowed in public schools. This was a time when the Supreme Court decided that America would be a secular nation. And the church had segregated itself and built a wall around itself, but with this decision, a wall began to be built around us by the culture itself. And there was a door on that wall. We were allowed to leave the enclosure and participate in the wider culture. But increasingly, God was confined. And it began to be socially unacceptable to talk about Jesus in public. You keep your religion to yourself. That's your private thing. But in the public square, we are secular. This was when it began to be official. And court decision after court decision has constructed this wall around us. And the society has evolved to the place where you can get away with using the most profane language in culture. But talk about Christ, and you've crossed a line. The secular world is very uncomfortable with it. I want you to see how America has changed statistically since 1963. You see, when the Supreme Court decision was made, birth rates for unwed girls 15 to 29, and you can see how it jumped from 63 to 93. Sexually transmitted diseases, the same demographic. You see 63, and that takes you to 85. It's even worse now. Center for Disease Control says that 1 in 4 teenage girls has a sexually transmitted disease. That's staggering. Center for Disease Control says that 1/3 of America has a sexually transmitted disease. Another age group, this is 10 to 14-year-olds. And just one sexually transmitted disease, gonorrhea. You see 63? This should take you to 91. Bit of a drop. Divorce rates, you see 63 through 92. Single parent households. You see the population growth. And you can see that houses headed by a single mother has grown exponentially. Oh, there's one trend that has gone down, SAT scores. From 62 to 94. How did we get here? Well, things began to change with remarkable speed. The Vietnam War was occurring domestically. This was the blasting cap that led to the countercultural revolution. And you see some of my generation there with a sign, "Make love, not war." The embracing of the sexual revolution by my generation. Barry McGuire, rock and roll star in the 60s, now a Christian, looked back and he says, there was a real shedding of the old dogma. Like boundaries of morality were being broken down and everyone was into the new party mode of just loving on each other, which destroyed thousands of us. I lost 16 of my personal friends through that lifestyle. Today, it should be Americans in the West, America, take off the N, and the West need to be understood in light of the social upheavals of the 60s and 70s. I am convinced you cannot understand what is happening today if you do not understand the 60s, the changes that came as a result of the countercultural revolution. We were, though not everyone was a Christian, we were certainly a Christian culture in our mores and morals. We are now a post-Christian culture. We are increasingly an anti-Christian culture, and that is the direct result of the countercultural revolution. Sociologist Peter Berger says it very well. He says the cultural situation in America today, and indeed in all Western societies, is determined by the cultural earthquake of the 1960s, the consequences of which are very much in evidence. What began as a counterculture only some 30 years ago, and he was writing this obviously 30 years in, we're 50 years from it now. What began as a counterculture only 30 years ago has achieved dominance in elite culture. And from the bastions of the latter in education, the education system, in the media, the higher reaches of law, and key positions within government bureaucracy has penetrated both the popular culture and the corporate world. It is characterized by an amalgam of both sentiments and beliefs that cannot be easily cataloged, though terms like progressive, emancipators, or liberationists serve to describe it. Intellectually, this new culture is legitimated by a number of loosely connected ideologies: leftover Marxism, feminism, and other sexual identity doctrines, racial and ethnic separatism, and various brands of therapeutic gospels and environmentalism. An underlying theme is antagonism towards Western culture in general, and American culture in particular. A prevailing spirit is one of intolerance and a grim orthodoxy, precisely caught in the phrase political correctness. Peter Berger is an outstanding sociologist. He's also a Christian, Lutheran. Comes at a few issues a lot differently than I would come at them. But he is one of those who gets it. He understands that what we are today is the result of the change in culture that happened as a result of the countercultural revolution of the 1960s. What were considered radical values in the 1960s are now mainstream. It is the culture. We live in it, and we don't even recognize where it came from. How did we get here? Well, I think Chris will recognize some of this. This is Lawrence Kohlberg, the most important man you've never heard of. He changed the morals of the world. Changed the morals of the United States of America, certainly. He was a professor at the University of Chicago, and he came up with a moral theory that codified the values of the 1960s. He shaped those 60s values through his moral philosophy, and his moral philosophy dominated the fields of morals and ethics for the better part of 3 decades. And even today, most ethicists would subscribe to Lawrence Kohlberg. Again, you've never heard of him. His morals, the moral code he invented, became the moral code that your children and grandchildren increasingly have. Now, he didn't actually codify it. That would remain for a man by the name of Jacques Thoreau to come up with humanitarian ethics. But he laid the foundations. He was, again, a professor at the University of Chicago, and he developed a theory of moral development. And this theory set up 3 distinct levels of moral thinking and maturity. There's the pre-conventional level. This is where you're born. You are being enculturated. Everything moral is being taught to you in terms of reward and punishment. The idea is you are going to do things and you are going to buy into them relative to the amount of pleasure or pain. So that's the pre-conventional level. We graduate from that, if we're enculturated well, into the conventional level. We accept those prevailing values that were taught to us as children in the home or in church. The idea is interpersonal concordance, which means we want to get along. We want concord. We want harmony. We want peace. Bill Cosby, greatly discredited, nevertheless said some very funny things and sometimes some very profound things. Talking about raising children, he says, children are concerned about justice. Parents are concerned about peace and quiet. And that is the concordant value. The orientation is law and order. The post-conventional level is what Kohlberg wanted all of us to move into. We begin to see that the laws and the rules of society are a social construct. And we give up the belief in absolute rules, and what we move into instead is looking for universal principles. There's different stages of all these. Stage 1 of 5, the person who reaches this level begins to understand that there is an end to the law, that we're trying to accomplish something through it. And the laws were just made to bring about higher ends. Laws then are the social construct or contract under which people live and agree to live so that they can have an ordered society. When you get to stage 6, the person who reaches this level defines right and wrong strictly by the decision of their conscience, in self-chosen accord with self-chosen ethical principles, appealing to logical comprehensiveness, universality, and consistency. The idea here, if you don't understand the fancy language, is that people no longer are looking to the church or the Bible for their rules. They are defining morality for themselves. See, the problem when you get God out of the picture, as we said, is who is going to fill his shoes? When we ask the who says so question, oh yeah, why should I do that? Who says so? We no longer answer that question. God says so, so who does say so? And Kohlberg's answer was, you say so. You accept a few near universal principles, and on every other matter of morals, you make your own rules. You get to be your own God. A critique of Kohlberg, very good by an atheist, by the way, who identifies himself as an intuitionist. He's a professor at the University of Virginia by the name of Jonathan Haidt. And he is one of those who questioned the Kohlberg orthodoxy in the last few years. He said, Mark Twain once said that to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And once Kohlberg developed should be his moral dilemmas and his scoring techniques, the psychological community had a new hammer. And thousands of graduate students used it to pound out dissertations on moral reasoning. But there's a deeper reason so many young psychologists began to study morality from a rationalistic perspective. And this was Kohlberg's second great innovation. He used his research to build a scientific justification for a secular, liberal, moral order. Kohlberg thought that parents and other authorities were obstacles to moral development. If you want kids to learn about the physical world, let them play with cups of water. Don't lecture them about the conservation of volume. And if you want kids to learn about the social world, let them play with other kids, resolve disputes. Don't lecture them about the 10 Commandments. And for heaven's sakes, don't force them to obey God or their teachers or you. This will only freeze them at the conventional level. And remember, Kohlberg's goal was that everyone moved to this post-conventional level, where they've given up absolute rules, just a second, Lucy, and they have embraced instead certain broad, almost absolute principles, and they make the other moral rules for themselves. Yes?
Did he have children, and what has become of his kids?
I have no idea. I know I was first exposed to this as a young pastor in about 1977 because they were wanting to teach this in the Fort Collin Public Schools, and so the philosophy department of CSU presented this forum where we were presented with Kohlberg's ideas, and I knew, and they did implement them, and they implemented these things all over the United States. Some of his things, some of you may have done when you were in school. Anyone play the lifeboat game or the bomb shelter game? These were moral dilemmas that were devised by Kohlberg as part of his research. Kohlberg believed that every kid that shows up at college is frozen at the conventional level. It's their parents' fault, and it's their religion's fault. And so entry-level courses in ethics are designed to undo the damage done to you by your parents, by your church. Textbook I use states you need to quit practicing everything you have learned about morals and ethics until you critically evaluate them, and then you decide what you're going to retain. And so he was very anti-parent because parents had frozen their kids at the conventional level. They believed in absolutes. The goal of education then is to move them past that and to accept other more relativistic moral theories, secular moral theories. The quote continues, says, Kohlberg's timing was perfect. Just as the first wave of baby boomers was entering graduate school. Stop. Who were those? After the Vietnam War ended, what did all those students that were protesting and wildly indignant about nearly everything, that's an acronym for swine, what did they do at that point in time? They went back to college, went to graduate school, had to make a living. And as they entered psychology or ethics, wow, Kohlberg's timing was perfect. The first wave of baby boomers were in graduate school. And he transformed moral psychology into a boomer-friendly mood to justice. 1960s value. He gave them a tool to measure children's progress towards the liberal idea. And for the next 25 years, from the 1970s through the 90s, moral psychologists mostly just interviewed young people about moral dilemmas and analyzed their justification. Most of this work was not politically motivated. It was careful, honest, scientific research. But by using a framework that defined morality as justice while denigrating authority, hierarchy, and tradition, it was inevitable that the research would support worldviews that were secular, questioning, and egalitarian. So, I think most evangelicals realize that something happens to the kids when they go away to college. And most evangelicals understand that there are teachers that are going to be antagonistic to their faith. And the best we have come to understanding that might be reflected in that movie that was produced last year, God Is Not Dead. Even though we miss Nietzsche's whole point, which hopefully you understand a little better now. And we understand that there's this antagonistic professor. Maybe he's had bad experiences, and this, there's this triumphalistic thing that the student leads the professor to the Lord in the end, and truth triumphs over falsehood, and it's deeper than that. Your kids, if they are raised in the culture, are exposed to the ideas of Kohlberg and his disciples from the time they watched their first television program. You see it in the children's programs on TV, the Sesame Streets and so forth, in the movies, in the television programs, in the popular culture. It isn't that the teachers in the public schools are intentionally trying to propagandize. They're teaching the materials they were taught. And they think nothing wrong, because this is where they are too. And all of it is the outgrowth of the values of the countercultural revolution that are now mainstream. We are living in the world John Lennon asked us to imagine. And it's not as lovely as he said it would be. Particularly for those of us who continue to hold to some measure of biblical truth. This is from the textbook I use. And this is Humanitarian Ethics, defined by a disciple, actually a colleague, someone they would have been contemporaries of Kohlberg, but one who nevertheless built his theory on Kohlberg's principles. He came up with a theory of ethics, which he says very ambitiously, I think this will work for the whole earth. It will replace the ethics that have been traditionally based or based on religious tradition, certainly replace divine rule type of absolutism. He said there are categories of almost absolutes, general principles that we all ought to buy into. The first is the value of life principle. We all ought to accept that life is valuable. Not that we never make an exception, but we realize that without life there can be no morality, and so we need to respect everyone's right to life. And then the goodness principle. He never defines goodness. That is very culturally defined. He said because that's what all moral systems try to do, is they try to produce a maximum amount of goodness over badness. And these two principles, he says, are the two most important. Logically, they're the first two things we need to come to. Society needs to have a respect for human life, a value of human life, and we need to have a commitment to goodness. So Moses went up on the 10 Commandments and came down with 10 absolute rules. Thoreau went up on Mount something or other near Bakersfield, California, and he came down with 2 tablets, and this is tablet number 1. Generally speaking, we should value life. But there may be some extreme circumstances where we should not. Generally speaking, we should be committed to promoting goodness over badness. Second category, sorry about the font change, is the principle of fairness and justice. Understand what that means to him is socialism. If you read his book, Socialism is Good, Capitalism is Bad, because it's unfair and unjust, and it results in the unfair distribution of society's good. Most human actions, more than one person is involved, and some form of distribution of goodness over badness must be established. What he means is government. What do we want from our government? We want them to justly distribute the goods. Okay? On his second tablet is also this, the principle of truth-telling and honesty. Generally speaking, again, we need to be honest. Because without some degree of some assumption that the person is going to be honest, you can't have commerce or anything else. So these are the almost always absolutes. Now he has another one that is actually the absolute of his system, and I actually think it's the first commandment. It's this, the principle of freedom. Because each individual is the only one truly able to decide what is good for himself. So we had the principle of goodness over badness. What am I seeking to promote? What I define as good. Now, this is a statement from Jacques Thoreau, from the textbook I use in teaching ethics. One person should not condemn another person for the way he or she lives. This is an explanation of his freedom principle. No matter how great the differences in lifestyle, as long as both people adhere to the principles of goodness, justice, value of life, and honesty. So as long as you subscribe to the definition of general goodness, as long as you are a good person in that you're not going around killing each other, you're a socialist, you have a general value for human life, and you're generally speaking an honest person, then you decide everything else for yourself. And we must never condemn anyone else for their choices, even if those choices, their rules, are different from our rules. Thus, we have the new definition of tolerance. Tolerance is no matter what a person is into, you never judge them as long as they're a good person as defined by the 4 almost absolutes. Are you following me here? You being able to see where it's coming from? Now, here's the deal. Let's examine it. In making this assertion that we just looked at, Thoreau is actually defining a new right and a new wrong. To understand contemporary society, you have to understand this. You sometimes feel it. You feel, goodness, what is right? What I've always been taught was right is now wrong. And what I've always believed was wrong is now right. How did that happen? How am I being condemned because I am standing for what we've always said this was right? We have to understand there's a new right and wrong. Okay? If we accept Thoreau's assertion, accepting others' lifestyle choices, no matter how different they are from ours, accepting their self-chosen moral rules, is the new good. Rejecting someone's lifestyle choices or the moral rules they have set for themselves is the new wrong. There is only one moral absolute in the prevailing morality of our time, and that is rejecting other self-chosen rules. Now you see how evil you are?
Could you repeat that again?
I'll try. There is only one wrong, and that is not accepting other people's. Of course, if you violate the 4 general rules, you're not a good person. But the real wrong, the biggest wrong you can commit in our society, the big no-no, is rejecting other people's self-chosen moral rules.
So being intolerant.
Yes. If you're accepting of other people and their lifestyle choices, no matter how different those choices are from yours, you're a good person. If you reject other people's self-chosen moral rules, you are by definition of the one absolute. Thou shalt not be intolerant. You are a bad person. Understand that.
You can't understand it because it's when you do it, it's counterproductive.
Yeah,
They reject me because of my chosen.
and they will, and that's okay. Let me explain why. Does this new good, before we get there, doesn't this new good require us to actually do more than tolerate in the old sense, which put up with other people? Say, I know you don't have my rules, I'll put up with you, we can work together here on the job, we'll be fine. Doesn't the new rule actually require us to affirm other people's moral choices? And say, in effect, your choices are as good as mine. I have my moral choices, I have my truth, you have your truth, I accept you, and I accept your rules for yourself. They're fine, they're as good as my choices for myself. Yes, Obed.
So, how we as a Christian should interact
Ah,
with environment?
see, you just keep wanting to go to lecture 4. How shall we then live? How shall we live for Christ in a world where the foundations...
That's the reason.
Yeah,
In the question in the wrong time.
read ahead. We'll get there. How should we as Christians live in a world where the foundations have been destroyed? That's the big question. Now, since the world's great religions all do not accept, none of the religions of the world accept everyone's lifestyle choice. They all condemn certain things. So does Thoreau's humanitarian ethics imply that all the world's great religions are wrong in their moral teaching? So understand, this is ultimately an anti-religious argument. Our culture is open to religion so long as it obeys the one absolute of tolerance. Okay, as long as it affirms justice, i.e. socialism, as long as it has some general value of the life of people, some general value for truth, these almost absolutes, almost absolutes, as long as it has that, the religion is acceptable. But a dogmatic religion that would say some lifestyle choices are wrong, that religion is therefore wrong. It is at variance with countercultural values. In fact, Thoreau is advocating a moral system that presupposes morals are both autonomous, which means everyone, they're not connected to any tradition, they're not connected to the Word of God, they're chosen by the individual. You know, if you want to live your life by biblical morality, fine, but be tolerant of others who make other moral choices. Yes?
This is usually, I also teach ethics over in Goodland, and this is usually a good point for me to point out to the class. With all this in place now, the way we view right, wrong, good, and bad, how do you suppose the whole legal system, specifically the courtroom, when we're trying to discern innocence from guilt, how does the jury of the peers now become relevant with everybody has an individualistic and autonomous
Oh, that's really good.
point of view? How do we condemn the guilty and find innocent if we all have different views of it? How does our justice system now function healthily?
Well, and it doesn't. You know, the fact is, it's dysfunctional. That book that I recommended to you, that we're going to talk some about later today, actually talks about this dysfunction. And
I usually point out sweet.
yeah, it's a very good.
We can see the fruits of this in OJ getting let go. That's how
Exactly. And other more recent trials as well. Justice is all over the board. There's no dependability to it.
Yeah, no one from U.S. Bank being prosecuted for the 2008.
Yeah, but the recent Supreme Court decision shows the affirming of the basic underlying value of tolerance.
Yeah.
Now this represents then, what Thoreau is proposing is a major departure from history, and it's affront to the majority standards of the world. This again is why the rest of the world has some trouble with America. And to help explain this, I'm going to bring in something from my world religions class now. Taboos, okay? Now, a taboo is a rule that forbids specific behaviors with regard to certain objects, people, animals, phases of life. There are things you must do, certain things you must not do. In indigenous religion, taboos are seen as a way of protecting the individual and the group, safeguarding the order of things so that the culture can be passed on from generation to generation. There's all kinds of taboos against antisocial behavior. There are taboos against adultery, certain sexual behaviors, stealing. Not always in every society. Some societies, everything is owned in common. And these things are generally dealt with in a society through warning, shunning, and expulsion of that person who is antisocial or breaks the taboos. Now, technologically advanced cultures like our own don't fear evil spirits anymore, though we should. And cultures such as our own don't fear God anymore. But no matter what the belief society, every society has always seen the need to protect the natural order of things. Every culture has its taboos, including the culture that was created as a result of the countercultural revolution of the 1960s. We have our taboos. There are things in our society which we cannot do. We've already talked about intolerance being the one thing you must not be. Now, like indigenous cultures, our culture, technologically advanced cultures, deal with those who break the rule through warning them, shunning them, avoiding them, or marginalizing them. The gay activists I corresponded with once in a moment of candor says the goal of our movement is that someday people who believe like you will be completely marginalized. We can't be kicked off the island, but we can be made into a villainous subculture that can be treated with intolerance because they are intolerant. Yes?
Wouldn't it almost be the only taboo that they have is really the religious people?
Yeah.
And everything else would have to be accepted?
Yeah, you have to understand that the ethical system that was foisted upon this nation and has been taught. I'm in the 11th edition of this textbook. It's been used since the 70s. It's the entry-level, the most popular entry-level book on ethics. You go to college, you take ethics, chances are you've had this book. My daughter-in-law says, oh yeah, we had that book when I was in college. Yeah, they have. Now, when considered along with what we already have learned here about taboos, let's go back to Thoreau's approach. Raises some questions. Does a society have a right to a public morality as opposed to a private morality? That the culture as large agrees that certain things are wrong. Can we really have a society where it's all individualistic? Thoreau is suggesting that society rid itself of its taboos. But isn't he actually exchanging our culture's traditional taboos from new ones? Okay, let's think this through. Every system of morality defines good and bad, social and antisocial, not just in the abstract, but in real and practical senses. Good individuals are those who embrace and obey society's rules. Bad individuals are those who reject and disobey the rules of society. A new system of morality, then, such as the one that was introduced in this country in the wake of the 1960s countercultural revolution, it doesn't eliminate taboos. It just creates new ones. It does this by replacing the old taboos for the new ones. And since every moral system creates its own taboos, it's ridiculous to say one person should not condemn another person for the way he or she lives, because we human beings are always going to find someone to censor or condemn. The people that break the rules are always going to be condemned. They're always going to be treated with intolerance. So, if we have a new absolute, and that new absolute is tolerance, then who are the new villains? See? If I say thou shalt not be intolerant, then those who are intolerant are breaking the rule. In extreme cases, we will deal with these antisocial behaviors through the force of law, outlawing and punishing the most egregious wrongdoers as defined by the new moral system. We will call it persecution. The other side will say, well, no, these are the bad people. How dare a judge say that he's not going to perform a marriage for a same-sex couple? The Supreme Court has spoken. And we live in an age when we must be accepting of everyone's lifestyle choices, no matter how different those choices might be from our own. See where it goes? In the final analysis, a culture that says thou shalt not condemn will not eliminate condemnation. It will just define a new group of people worthy of condemnation. And that's us.
I don't know if we're worthy.
The society would consider us worthy of condemnation. But that's where we're at. Yes?
Doesn't it come down to where you all started this whole process? We have to, since we don't have God anymore, we have to replace Him. So we're going to make ourselves God, and as long as my Godship doesn't mess with your Godship, I'm okay.
My truth, your truth. You must accept my truth. How dare you not accept my truth? You must be a really bad person. You're an old absolutist. You're a Christian? Well, no wonder.
Because someone has to be God, and so if we don't have God, then we can be our own God.
And that, it comes back to what Nietzsche said. We're going to have to be it. If we've killed God, then we're going to have to take His place. And Jacques Thoreau says, good idea. Let's do that. Obed was first, and I'll get you. Yes?
But the same people who claim to be tolerant become intolerant to accept us.
But that's okay. There's actually a bill that, I showed this in my class, it was before the European Parliament, where they said it is okay, we want to criminalize intolerance, and it's okay to be intolerant of the intolerant. And it's really consistent. You always can be intolerant towards the bad guys. You can always marginalize the bad guys. Who wants to hang around with a bunch of neo-Nazis, right? They're the bad guys. And we're the bad guys. We can't go to the question, how should we then live, until we understand who we are now. Yes?
So it's the target, right and wrong, male, female, and we are just, the Christian culture is the symbol of that?
Yes.
The Christian culture that's the target, and they're trying to break that down or I guess as a farmer, I want to know where the problem is and how to deal with it,
Yeah. And
I go back and forth. Is it Christian that is, it's targeted, or is it what we believe that's the target, and we're the symbol of that.
Any dogmatic religion is the target. Christians, Orthodox Jews, and Islam.
So it is the individuals. That's what he's asking. Is it actually the religion that we believe?
It is the religion we believe and us as religious believers.
It's our intolerance.
Yeah, it is our intolerance. You go to a church that's intolerant. Your church will not do gay weddings. In Colby, that works okay.
If they don't go to
For
a
now.
mosque, that would also not.
Well, they're afraid of the mosque. See, Christians you can pick on. Muslims will kill you. There's a great video online where some guy pretending to be gay goes in, tries to get several Muslim bakeries in Dearborn, Michigan, to make a wedding cake for him. And you can be sure those bakeries will never be taken to court. You know, they said no, all of them, and it's just not going to happen. But we are a good target. You notice TV shows how Christianity is portrayed now?
Even the role of a traditional family is
Pushovers.
Yes, because that's where we're getting this stuff. That's where the hate's being taught in your traditional family. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yes.
I see a lot of what we see in the shift in mainstream culture go hand in hand, and they embrace also new religion in evolution.
Sure.
They seek to replace everything we know about the Bible and who we are and why we're here with an explanation,
Sure.
alternative. So they turn to science and Darwin, single cell, whatever.
Yeah.
But there's inconsistent. I like my friend in the back row. I struggle with the duplicity to say there's no absolute yet in science. That's the whole basis of science, is looking for absolute truth in science, mathematics.
Well, as we're going to see in postmodernism, science is even under assault.
So, no, but what I'm saying is absolutism's okay in one hand, but not the other. We must embrace relativism.
Well, that's a big battle, and we will get to that after lunch when we talk about postmodernism. But you're right. Science itself is under assault. Postmodernists do not like the arrogance of science that says it can find absolute truth. So the idea, it's under assault everywhere, as the general principle is being applied broadly. Close us down a little bit, and then you can all get some lunch and come back about 1:15 or so, because we went a little long. You need to understand the United States biblical Christians are the new group worthy of condemnation. Questions? And Pam didn't think it could be done. I almost made it. We're about 2 minutes late. I'll stick around for individual questions, but go have some lunch. Be back here about 1:15 or so, okay? Oh, we have food here?
No, I said, so you're not going to go.
Well, if someone stays and asks questions, I'll hang around. But
He was expecting you to bring in something.
yes. I'm old school.